respirators are important for worker safety. You must wear a respirator whenever working around asbestos or ACMs that have a chance of producing the fiber-containing dust. Depending on the work being performed, workers will either need to wear an air-supplied respirator or an air-purifying respirator equipped with a HEPA filter. Respirators are required for all Class 1, 2, and 3 work, as well as Class 4 work performed in a regulated area. Many types of respirators provide protection from asbestos dust and fibers. A respirator is usually selected according to the nature of the work and the amount of asbestos that may be produced. Although air-purifying respirators equipped with HEPA filters will offer protection against asbestos dust, it is highly recommended that a full-face air-supplied respirator is used to better ensure workers do not inhale any asbestos dust. Before entering the work area, workers must put on their respirators, make sure that they fit properly, and check that there are no gaps through which asbestos fibers may enter. Respiratory protection against asbestos can be obtained through two basic types of respirators: air-purifying respirators and atmosphere-supplying respirators. Air-purifying respirator. Atmosphere-supplying respirator. Supplied air respirators, SAR. Self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, unit. Inspection. Regardless of the respirator, it is vital that you inspect yours for wear and tear before and after each use. Pay special attention to any rubber or plastic parts that could deteriorate easily. The facepiece, headband, valves, connecting tube, fittings, and cartridges filters must be in good condition. Replace chemical cartridges and canisters as necessary and replace mechanical filters as needed to avoid experiencing difficulty breathing. A respirator inspection also needs to include checking connections for proper tightness. Repair. Only an experienced person is permitted to make repairs, using parts specifically designed for the respirator. This person must consult the manufacturer's instructions for any repair, and no attempt should be made to repair or replace components outside the manufacturer's recommendations. Additionally, employers need to keep records of inspection dates and findings. Cleaning and storage. After use, respirators should be cleaned and disinfected as necessary, especially if they were used in an emergency rescue situation. At the very least, they should be wiped down with a manufacturer-approved respirator refresher wipe. This will help keep bacteria and fungus at bay. There are many instances where a worker's failure to consistently clean his respirator led to prolonged illness and discomfort. Outside of general cleaning, a deep cleaning is not only wise but required, especially as it concerns the changing of the cartridges. While there are general guidelines for cleaning, you should strictly follow the manufacturer's schedule regarding when and how your type of respirator should be taken apart and cleaned. Deep cleaning should include a thorough washing of any and all straps, valves, hoses, diaphragms, seals, face shields, etc. Once cleaned and allowed to dry completely, new cartridges should be installed, and the respirator should be stored in a way that guards it against dust, sunlight, extreme temperatures, excessive moisture, or any detrimental chemicals. Consider hanging it in a clean location, like a locker designated for such a purpose, or placing it in an approved sealable bag. Additionally, when packed or stored, make sure each respirator is positioned to allow it to maintain its natural shape and formation. This will prevent the rubber or plastic from deforming and or cracking. Case study. Select the buttons below to explore the comic or get more details. Isolating the work area. All designated work areas must be isolated to prevent unauthorized personnel from entering. To isolate a work area, employers should place signs around it to warn unauthorized people against entering. The work area must be enclosed with proper polyethylene sheets that will contain the asbestos fibers. If the work area cannot be enclosed, a notice must be provided to all workers specifying alternative work procedures that can control the risk of asbestos exposure. In order for the contaminated air to remain in the enclosed area or filtered prior to release, the air pressure in the work area must be kept lower than that of the surrounding area. This low pressure should be maintained until all work has been completed. Stairways and elevators must be sealed off using polyethylene sheets and tape. The air heating and ventilation system in the work area must also be shut down, and all ducts should be sealed off with polyethylene sheets. All devices and fixtures that can be removed should be wiped with damp cloths and removed from the contaminated area. All non-removable devices and fixtures should be covered with polyethylene sheets. The floor of the work area must be covered with polyethylene sheets that also extend at least 12 inches up the wall. All enclosures must be inspected on a regular basis to ensure that there are no breaks, tears, or leaks. Decontaminating workers. In order to ensure that workers do not carry any contaminants outside the work area, they must be decontaminated in a designated space inside the work area. Before entering the contaminated work area, workers should remove their street clothing in a clean room and put on clean work clothes. They must make sure that their respirator fits properly. Workers are required to enter the personnel transfer room and put on the required personal protective equipment. They can then proceed toward the contaminated work area to carry out the assigned tasks. After leaving the contaminated work area, workers should remove the asbestos fibers from personal protective equipment using a proper system. They must remove all protective clothing and equipment in the personnel transfer room. Any disposable clothing must be placed in polyethylene bags and disposed of properly. When the respirator and its harness are free from all contaminants, these should then be removed. The workers can then enter the clean room to put on their street clothes. The respirator should be cleaned, disinfected, and stored in the clean room until it is required again. All tools and equipment must be stored in the equipment holding room. Controlling airborne asbestos fibers. In order to properly control the asbestos fibers in the air, materials containing asbestos should only be removed after getting approval from authorized personnel. Workers must never use dry clothes or compressed air to clean asbestos-containing materials. After all the asbestos-containing materials have been removed, all exposed surfaces in the work area must be properly cleaned. Employers must identify all asbestos material that is encapsulated and must ensure that it is firmly bound by the encapsulating material so that there are no loose fibers. Workers must ensure that encapsulating material does not disturb the bond between asbestos-containing material and its supporting surface. Workers must make sure that they disturb or displace the least amount of asbestos-containing material possible while repairing it. After performing this task, they should seal the exposed asbestos and then remove the work enclosure. All surfaces that are exposed must be washed thoroughly and properly protected. Disposing of asbestos waste materials. To ensure that asbestos waste is properly disposed of, all waste materials should be placed in leak-proof containers while they are still inside the enclosed area. These containers should be sealed and labeled, and their outside surfaces should be decontaminated before they are removed from the storage room and the waste transfer room. In order to prevent the containers from getting damaged or torn while being transported to the disposal site, workers must properly package them using double polyethylene bags. Employers must ensure that asbestos-containing waste material is disposed of immediately or after each work shift. All arrangements must be made in advance with the concerned authorities to transport the waste to the assigned dumpsters. It is very important to inform the transport drivers about the hazards of asbestos and the appropriate measures they must take. Signs must be placed on the transport vehicles displaying the nature of the materials being transported. Once the asbestos waste has been removed, workers must decontaminate the enclosure and all the equipment by washing and vacuuming. Finally, the air inside the enclosure must be decontaminated before taking apart the enclosure. Collecting samples of materials that may contain asbestos. Only a qualified person may collect samples of materials that may contain asbestos. These samples must then be sent immediately to a laboratory where their contents can be determined. To collect samples, a qualified person must take the safety precautions that are recommended for moderate risk activities. Before collecting samples, there must be no unprotected workers present in the work area. The materials should be prepared to ensure that no asbestos fibers will be released during the collection process, and the workers must disturb the least amount of material possible. To ensure that the sample is valid, it should be taken by deep penetration into the material. The sample collector must observe the color and the texture of the various materials present in the work location in order to collect samples of all the materials present. Samples should then be placed in leak-proof containers and properly sealed. Labels must also be placed on the containers to identify the contents as laboratory samples. To collect any loose material that may break off while sampling, the floor of the work area should be covered with polyethylene sheets. After completion of the work, these sheets must be placed in leak-proof containers and disposed of properly. All workers present near the sampling area must be equipped with a respirator, as sampling can create airborne asbestos fibers that could be hazardous to health. Air purifying respirator. A respirator with an air purifying filter, cartridge, or canister is called an air purifying respirator. This respirator removes asbestos contaminants from the air by passing it through an air purifying component, making it acceptable to breathe normally. Atmosphere supplying respirator. An atmosphere supplying respirator consists of a component that provides the user with breathable air that is not taken from the ambient atmosphere. There are two types of atmosphere supplying respirators: supplied air respirators, SARs, and self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, units. Supplied air respirators, SAR. Supplied air respirators use a hose called an airline to provide clean air from an air tank. There are two types of supplied air respirators. 1. A pressure demand respirator prevents the contaminated air from entering the face piece by maintaining positive pressure. The other type, continuous flow respirators, also maintain positive pressure, this time by constantly supplying fresh air to the face piece. Self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, unit. A SCBA unit consists of a hose that is connected to a cylinder of compressed air. Activities that carry a risk of exposure to asbestos do not usually require the use of SCBAs. However, in some cases, pressure demand SCBAs are used, which supply air to the face piece if the inside pressure reduces due to inhalation or leakage. Employee number 1 maintained pumping units, removing valve gaskets. He used a wire wool grinder to remove a gasket, exposing him to asbestos-containing material, ACM. He was hospitalized for lung irritation from chemical exposure. Employee number 1 lacked a respirator for asbestos protection. Proper PPE is required for asbestos work. What went wrong? Employee number 1 was not wearing a respirator, which would have protected him from asbestos dust and fibers. Any employees who perform asbestos-related tasks must wear the appropriate protective equipment. Practice opportunity. In each scene, you will see someone doing something wrong. See if you can pick the person who is making a mistake. Answer each question with the best options available. Select Begin to get started. Employee notification of monitoring results. Within 15 working days after receiving the results of any monitoring performed, the employer must notify each affected employee of these results, either individually in writing, or by posting the results in an appropriate location that is accessible to all affected employees. The notification should contain the corrective action being taken by the employer to reduce exposure to, or below the TWA and/or excursion limit wherever monitoring results indicated that the TWA and/or excursion limit had been exceeded. You must keep accurate records of the following: all measurements taken to monitor employee exposure to asbestos, kept for 30 years. Medical records, including physicians' written opinions, kept for the duration of the employee's employment plus 30 years. Training records, kept for 1 year beyond employee's last date of employment. Lesson summary. All workers who are required to perform asbestos-related tasks must wear the appropriate protective equipment. Protective clothing should be made with a material that does not allow asbestos fibers to penetrate. The protective clothing should cover the whole body and should fit comfortably at the neck, wrists, and ankles. Headgear and boots that resist the penetration of asbestos fibers must also be worn, and if protective clothing gets damaged or torn, it must be replaced immediately. To collect any loose material that may break off while sampling, the floor of the work area may need to be covered with polyethylene sheets. After completion of the work, these sheets must be placed in leak-proof containers and disposed of properly. Only a qualified person may collect samples of materials that may contain asbestos. These samples must then be sent immediately to a laboratory where their contents can be determined. Workers must disturb the least amount of material possible. By washing and vacuuming, one must then decontaminate the enclosure and all of the equipment. Next, all exposed surfaces from which asbestos has been removed should be sealed or protected. Finally, the air inside the enclosure must be decontaminated before taking apart the enclosure. In order to prevent the containers from getting damaged or torn while being transported to the disposal site, they must be properly packaged using double polyethylene bags. All permanent enclosures around asbestos-containing materials must be airtight and warning signs must be put up inside enclosures to warn workers about the dangers of asbestos and inform them of any protective measures that must be taken. Workers must never use dry cloths or compressed air to clean asbestos-containing materials. Also, in order for the contaminated air to remain in the enclosed area or to be filtered prior to release, it must be ensured that the air pressure in the work area is lower than the surrounding area. This low pressure area should be maintained until all work has been completed. All designated work areas must be isolated in order to prevent unauthorized personnel from entering. In order to isolate a work area, signs should be placed around it to warn unauthorized persons against entering.
Testing, testing. Zajebtio, idem kurs završni, finalni test. Čekaj, ako izgubim partiju, boli me kurac, ima vremena, riješćemo sve to. Evo te sunce, radio sam kurs za 29 sati, 29,5 sati, treba 30 sati da se završi. Nemoj me jebati. A ja majmun uspije pogoditi, ja kad bi tako gađao, ja bi ga, ili ga u no armor pogodio ili pičku maternu pogodio, debilnu. Jebem ti debilni RNG pičke materne usrane. Šta čekaj sada?
Kažeš da sam gad, a bez tebe izgubio sam sve za jednu noć, sve za jedan dan.
Sve bit će okej, samo me nazovi, kidaš me i ne znaš kako boli, lupiš me, a volim te.
Miriše mi leto na bela jutra, moje srce beton, ne zna se ljubav ako domine, ruše nas godine.
Oči ti ne gube sjaj, jaj, jaj, s tobom nikad nije kraj, jaj, jaj, bebe nikad, bye, 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 bye.
Nikad, 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 bye, bye.
Oči ti ne gube sjaj, jaj, jaj, s tobom nikad nije kraj, jaj, jaj, bebe nikad, bye, 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 bye.
Nikad, 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 bye, bye.
Kada misli lete, kada ne mogu da smirem tablete, kada odrastem i nisam više dete, znaj da nikog neću voleti kod tebe, zakuni se o mene, nisam kao ti, 100 puta u meni rad izazvao si, i 100 puta zbog tebe sam se kidala ko nit, na Dunavu Beligrad sanjali smo mi, sve dala bih jer ti me pogledom hipnotišeš, dok tlo pod nama puca kao staklo, noćas sama bojim se, al bi plesala sad ti tango. Sve bit će okej, samo me nazovi, kidaš me i ne znaš kako boli, lupiš me, a volim te.
Miriše mi leto na bela jutra, moje srce beton, ne zna se ljubav ako domine, ruše nas godine.
Oči ti ne gube sjaj, jaj, jaj, s tobom nikad nije kraj, jaj, jaj, bebe nikad, bye, 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 bye.
Nikad, 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 bye, bye.
Oči ti ne gube sjaj, jaj, jaj, s tobom nikad nije kraj, jaj, jaj, bebe nikad, bye, 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 bye.
Nikad, 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 bye, bye. Jedan umoran dan već budi, plavim rukama noć i mesec doziva, a ja tonem u san ko kamen što je bacio s obale, pali dečak sa snovima. Noću hoću da te ne gledam, sreću kad se budim da te ne sanjam, uporno si pričam da si nebitna, znaju zvezde da je sve to laž, laž i laž. A ti negdje pijana, vazduh gubiš od prljavih dodira, nisi se za ljubav sreću rodila, malo mi je samo žao nas, nas, nas. Ti i ja, mi smo zamršeni čvor, pitanje koja nema odgovor, igračka bačena iza kreveta, koju je ljubav izgubila. Ti i ja, mi smo mogli skoro sve, da trajemo samo nismo mogli, ne, mi Loše si birala, jednom si voljela nekog što ne zna da voli, pa sad ko pas ti režeš na svakoga. Zašto si dirala moje
Kako ne možeš da ga otpotaš, Bog te mazo.
koji sad želele drugoga. Ti
Tu
znaš
si.
da verujem ti ja i znaš da nekad si mi čudna, teče polako peščani sad za našu ljubav. U bašti punoj tulipana uvek ćeš biti najlepši cvet, korajna svetla Rotterdama, tiho zagrli nas. Ti i ja, mi smo zamršeni čvor, pitanje koje nema odgovor, igračka bačena iza kreveta, koju je ljubav izgubila. Ti i ja, mi smo mogli skoro sve, da trajemo, samo nismo mogli ne, mi smo šećer i so, sreća i bol, šteta baš lepi smo zajedno. Padaju zvezde i svici ko pepeo na moj dlan.
Jeba ga, sunce ga jeblo, znači nisam mogu da probijem, matio sam frontalno. To je bila medalja moćna.
Duže mi je štikla nego ljubav tvoja, evo sviće zora, ako priznaš bit smo pola pola. Ne ljutim se, samo pusti me da rolam, znaš kad hoću mogu da te vrtim ko vola. Sve ne gorim, neka besni, ne dam ti slobodu, malo ljubavi donesi. A tebe ko jebe nosi se, nosi se. Šta još treba da se desi? Ti i ja smo samo rođeni besni. Ti i ja ko da na istoj smo adresi. Ljuljaju demoni ko da popili smo benzin. Šta još treba da se desi? Kao lude zveri pokidane svesti. Ti i ja ko da na istoj smo adresi. A kad svane jutro, sve ne gorim, neka besni, ne dam ti slobodu, malo ljubavi donesi. A tebe ko jebe nosi se, nosi se. Šta još treba da se desi? Ti i ja smo samo rođeni besni. Ti i ja ko da na istoj smo adresi. Ljuljaju demoni ko da popili smo benzin. Šta još treba da se desi? Kao lude zveri pokidane svesti. Ti i ja ko da na istoj smo adresi. A kad svane jutro, duže mi je štikla nego ljubav tvoja. Ne ljutim se što mi telo je do pola. Ljuljaju demoni ko da popili smo benzin. Ostala mi štikla sada na tvojoj adresi. Šta još treba da se desi? Šta još treba da se desi?
Verujem mi da mi kažeš da je slatka sol, a da je ljubav prava veća što je jači bol. Toliko puta pao, toliko stvari saznao, me cilete ljudi prete, ja te telom branio. Ne znam kako je sve krenulo i kad pošlo po zlu, svi ti razlozi su nestali, ali osjećaj je tu. 10 dana nepomično ležim u svom krevetu, tražim način da srce ubacim u moju barbiku. Šta znači nam zapravo raj? Ako nisu nam voljeni tu, ti samo umeš da započneš kraj. A ja ću da zapevam la 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 la. Kući se vraćam iz izgubljenog grada. dišem dim, nisam znao šta se radi kad te sreća uhvati. Koliko teško je da nekog jako zavoliš i kroz suze gledaš kako tako lako odlazi. Ove ulice su moje lutalice, verne tu kažu teško se prebole maline u septembru. Čekam zime da mi prođu sećanja da uvenu i da izbacim iz srca moju malu barbiku. Šta znači nam zapravo raj ako nisu nam voljeni tu? Ti samo umeš da započneš kraj, a ja ću da zapevam la 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 la. Kući se vraćam iz izgubljenog grada. La 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 la. Tu jednog dana ti plakat ćeš za nama. La 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 la. Kući se vraćam iz izgubljenog grada. La 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 la. Tu jednog dana ti plakat ćeš za nama.
Izađi na njega, Bog te jebo, pa ne gleda na mene. Gleda na mene, ne možeš da ga dođeš, nabiješ jednom da se okrene. Taman mi ovaj majmun trebao da ga ubijem za duelistu.
Da li hteo bi da malo budemo nemirni? Prvi put da ne budemo ni malo sebični. Neće dovoljni nam biti ni svi svemiri, ni svemiri.
Please, Captain. Gdje je 300? Da imamo da sam pogodio onoga. Gdje je 500? Curen Emil, Oni, Leo, T20.
Tvoj trip su igre i neću da gubim u njima. Da li hteo bi da malo budemo nemirni? Prvi put da ne budemo ni malo sebični. Neće dovoljni nam biti ni svi svemiri, ni svemiri, ne. Zore oči tvoje opet opile su me. Stvarno ne mogu ja više da te menjam na bolje. Panika hvata steže SOS karika. U našem lancu pukla je. Budne zore oči tvoje opet opile su me. Stvarno ne mogu ja više da te menjam na bolje. Panika hvata steže SOS karika. U našem lancu pukla je. Ni milion, ni početak je i kraj. Sve je drugo prevara. Ja sve bi da ti dam i sve ću da ti dam. Jer zauvijek ljubav. No drugo ne pada. Kolje kraj svaki pola sata. Dođi napravimo odmah nered. Podignem ti cijenu čim te odaberem. Ovdje oko mene sve su opterene. Znaš da samo evre perem, oduzmem ti pa saberem. Raste tenzija, sve sam prelija. Mesija, sve sija od refleksija. A ti pališ se ko kerosin. Dođi, a da ti prorate senzori. Ajde dođi, stako mi je zatamljeno, cveće zapaljeno. Ajde dođi, a u srcu šta je njeno je zbog mene sahranjeno. Noća si moj, ma sve zavrti, samo padni na moj broj. Treba mi to, da kažeš alo, ja znam da ti si tako, ćemo siguran uz moj. Da li znaš ti to, noća si moj, ma sve zavrti, samo padni na moj broj. Treba mi to, da kažeš alo, ja znam da ti si tako, ćemo siguran uz moj. Da li znaš ti to?
Така шпинка.
Hands up, ko da je ja hoću hands up. Ja tvoj sam tip, can't stop. A ti me skini s prvog mesta. A ja kuni, pljuni, ali me ne remete. Uzmem lupim kras, dođi mi ne repete. Duni, sistem mi kod tebe de. Iz nevere gledam repere dok repere. A ti pališ se ko kerosin. A da ti prorate senzori. Stako mi je zatamljeno, cveće zapaljeno. A u srcu šta je njeno je zbog mene sahranjeno. Noća si moj, ma sve zavrti, samo padni na moj broj. Treba mi to, da kažeš alo, ja znam da ti si tako, ćemo siguran uz moj. Da li znaš ti to, noća si moj, ma sve zavrti, samo padni na moj broj. Treba mi to, da kažeš alo, ja znam da ti si tako, ćemo siguran uz moj. Da li znaš ti to? A još ti pamtim prezime, ko liše jesen prezime. U isto vreme ja te volim i prezirem. Al baš me tada sve stigne, kad tuga sreću prestigne. I još te više volim i prezirem. A još ti pamtim prezime, ko liše jesen prezime. U isto vreme ja te volim i prezirem. Al baš me tada sve stigne, kad tuga sreću prestigne. I još te više volim i prezirem. Na tebi videla baš sve što sam nekad htjela, a ispred sebe imam sve što sam zamrzela. A veruj meni sve dok od te bude nekak htjela. Biće dela bang bang, veruj biće tela. Džaba menjam grad, džaba mi dva hotela. Kad ti kažem da je kraj posle dva koktela. Kad ti kažem da si taj pravi šedela. Na kraju kažem da si kralj bez koga ne bih sjela. A još ti pamtim prezime, ko liše jesen prezime. U isto vreme ja te volim i prezirem. Al baš me tada sve stigne, kad tuga sreću prestigne. I još te više volim i prezirem. Na tebi vidim crno, vidim belo. U isto vreme jeftino i najskuplje odelo. tebi vidim sever u očima zima, u isto vreme vidim teko sunce koje sija. Džaba menjam grad, džaba mi dva hotela, kad ti kažem da je kraj posle dva koktela. Kad ti kažem da si taj pravi ševela, na kraju kažem da si kraj bez koga ne bih sjela. A još ti pamtim prezime, ko lišće jesen prezime, u isto vreme ja te volim i prezirem. Al baš me tada sve stigne, kad tuga sreću prestigne i još te više volim i prezirem. A još ti pamtim prezime, ko liše jesen prezime, u isto vreme ja te volim i prezirem. Al baš me tada sve stigne, kad tuga sreću prestigne i još te više volim i prezirem.
Još uvek si ti na meni, a ja u tebi. Još uvek mi budiš neni, moja glumice. Još uvek si ti na meni, a ja to želim. Još jednom mi daj, 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 sve mi daj. Ona, u glavi mi je. Ona, i niko kao ona. I kada nije moja. A jako bolestan, ponašam se kao da sam jako bolestan. Zovem te po 1000 puta na dan, da kažem da ga moja, vidimo se posle. Da kažem ti da jedina si koju znam, žena koja meni tako lako može, jako da uvuče mi se ispod kože. Šta sa tobom ove duge noći nose, sada ćemo da ga sedi u moj dvosed i vodim te na mesto dakle se vidi grad, gde su zvezde noću najsjajnije. I đavoli se sastaju sa Bogom, gde zavoli se sve što nije dobro, a kamoli to ljubav ko sa drogom. Opasno igrati se s tobom je. Ona, u glavi mi je. Ona, i niko kao ona. I kada nije moja. A zovem je da svrati, pa nebitni su kilometri, svi kasni sati, daljine i krivine prolaze, ali ti si uvek tu, pored puta kao znak, da vratiš me na put kada izgubim svoj trag. Dani su veli, ko haliberi, a ti na meni, ko Majlija, a dani veli, dok more peni, tiho mi reci, šta bi radila, Ona, u glavi mi je. Ona, i niko kao ona. I kada nije moja. Ona, u glavi mi je. Ona, i niko kao ona. I kada nije moja.
Davim se u moru punom beline, svi su tu, ali niko ne čuje mi glas. Nadam se da ovo sve je bilo